Like if you commit 10 years like a slave, you'll be that guy, right? If that guy doesn't look like someone you want to be, then why take a ride down a path where you're not going to want to get to a destination? My mom voluntarily had to give up everything in order not to trigger the fact that we were coming to America to stay here. She was like, I just got to leave in 1 week and I can't take anything with me. So I have to liquidate everything basically and take whatever I can.
Do you think some people are naturally suited to corporate life? Or do you believe actually no one is truly meant for corporate culture and only few are bold enough to challenge it?
I know this is going to be controversial that I say this, but
I know you're a smart man, understanding of the world, understanding of wealth. Where do you see the US going?
So I don't think the US is going to lose being the US. And the reason for that is because everything in America is a business. Any person who's here that doesn't believe that is an imbecile. Media has shifted because Facebook is unregulated. So Facebook can spread a lie, or X can spread a lie, or Instagram can spread a lie with no consequence. And the news is trusted content from experts who now have to say outlandish things to try to keep up with narratives found on social media that aren't real. So they feed into that social media narrative when it's not in the best interest of anybody for any reason but their ratings.
What top 3 events in your life have most defined your philosophy?
That's a really good question.
We are live. Welcome back to the Story Vault podcast, the #1 podcast for the real stories and exclusive insights behind your favorite experts, creators, and thinkers. Got a very special guest today, the man, the myth, the legend, Pejman Ghadimi. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
I appreciate you having me on. Call me PJ, so make it easy for everybody. They don't get confused.
PJ. You got it. PJ, a pleasure to have you on. Really excited to delve into your journey, your story, and some of your expertise. But first of all, what I want to ask is, as I've been delving into your journey, doing some more research, I didn't realize that even though you don't necessarily have like a podcast right now, like that's your main focus, but you were actually one of the OGs in like a podcast game. So is that correct? And
I mean, we go way back. You know, a lot of people know me from the internet now, talking cars, watches, and some of that stuff, but they don't realize that I was online literally doing what people are doing today. Like 10 plus years ago, it was in 2007 that we started doing the first set of video interviews instead of written interviews when magazines were transitioning to online media. And so we built the world's first school back then of entrepreneurs, and I was the guy doing what you're doing in 2007 to 2013. And then I saw so many of you guys coming out and starting to get involved in this niche that I decided that I wanted to do something very different, and so I pivoted. But that was a very beautiful part of my online upbringing, you would say, you know?
yeah, that's cool. So I'm really curious. Obviously, podcasting's massive now, and everyone and their cat has a podcast, it seems. But for you, obviously, in that time, like 2007, what kind of sparked the desire for a video podcast? Obviously, hadn't come around. What was the thought process?
So that's a very good question. I'm very much ahead of trends. So I try not to be in a trend when a trend's popular. I'm like either ahead of it or it wasn't my trend to basically tap into. And that's how I kind of look at it. You know, there's trends for things and I'm like, this isn't my thing, so I don't care. You know what's going on in the world, it's not related to me. But for me, that was very specifically important because early in my business career, I had a blog that was focused on doing stories around people who weren't that famous but had exotic cars. And I would basically talk about their business journey called Secret Entourage. And so, it was originally, the reason we went with a blog is because I originally wanted to do a magazine because magazines were still very popular at the time. And I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna do a magazine. We'll do something online. It's ahead. Maybe people will come online, maybe they won't, but we'll just go with it. And when it did get popular, I wanted to reinvent the genre again. And since I was doing video interviews in order to transcribe them into these great stories, you know, and build these beautiful like cover stories for people, I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I might as well release the video footage, you know, of the side-by-side interview because people are probably going to want to learn more from a video than reading an article. And so I decided to use video format then, and I did 100 70 plus interviews with some of the brightest minds at the time that weren't that well known, but were very successful. And we would, the problem was we would do so much background check on people to make sure they had money, they weren't scamming, they weren't faking, they weren't a fly-by-night guy that just got popular on the internet. Like basically 90% of the internet didn't qualify for what we're doing. And this was the best thing because we provided great education, but it was the thing that also killed my business. Because I wasn't willing.
Really?
Yeah, because I wasn't willing to have a scam artist on that had a large following because he had all kinds of BS going on in his life. Like that either he was wanted for some fraud or he was being investigated by the FBI or something. And I was like, I don't want to touch those guys because I was really interested in reshaping education. And those guys are the guys with the most clout that are constantly online spreading bullshit and basically like being like, I got 10 million followers, because so the dumbest people and more importantly, the biggest scammers are the ones with the loudest voices. So it was such a difficult thing for me to kind of try to keep the integrity of like with the podcast slash, the video interviews. And as a result, it basically cost us our business because other people would come into the genre and they would be like, I'm willing to do this interview with so-and-so. I'm willing, and they would bring these big names. And I was like, are you guys out of your mind? There's like 5 indictments against that guy, or this guy was known for like basically beating his girlfriend, getting convicted and going to jail. I was like, I'm not posting this jackass, like on here. And people are like, no, man, that's like, so like the way to go. Everybody wants to hear about this. And even to this day, I decline so many interview requests by people who have those very same people on their podcasts. But if you look at those lines, take a look, even Joe Rogan, right? Like a huge name, like we're talking about $1 billion podcast, is still bringing on cartoon characters that are questionable in many cases, and people today are like, well, it's a good side of the equation. I don't know why you would give a con artist or a criminal a voice and somehow say we need to hear their point of view. And to me, that was the driving factor to defining my reputation online very early, where I said, I don't care the money that gets made from this. I don't care that we're number 1, number 10 or not. I'm not selling my soul to just whatever, like whoever, just for some like basic popularity. And I said, this isn't the point of what I'm doing online. And I'm glad I did that. It took me much longer to get successful online because of that. But now I'm probably one of the OGs that's consistently been doing this without a single complaint, without a single scam thing, without not a single person being like, oh, he's associated with so-and-so or that person, or he knows that guy, or, and I could be more popular if I accepted to be in this clans, but I'll never forget that. There was this one guy that came to us and he was like, dude, I got 10 million followers. And I specifically asked him, I said, what's the play? And he goes, well, I'm going to interview you. And I said, great. Okay, I'll go on your podcast, talk to all your audience. And then he's like, but you're going to interview me. And I was like, no. I was like, that's not happening because I know it's a scam. And then here's the thing. We did this podcast 3 times and I gave him a chance. I said, and this is a very famous person whose name starts with a T. And so, and he did a very big video in someone's garage, if you know what I mean. So, he basically, I told him, so I told him, I said, if you're willing to talk about marketing and how you're a great marketer, then I'll do this video, And he wasn't. He was only talking about this fake background story thing he had created. He wasn't talking about any of the stuff. And I was like, no, sorry. Now that person became much bigger than me on the social front. But here's the problem. So he started a little bit after me and he got bigger than me. But here was the biggest problem is today, people still aren't talking about the fact that there are lawsuits for like $300 million like on that person and his other so-called successful business partner when they were out going and buying a bunch of retail stores and trying to make them into e-com businesses, and it failed. And my argument has always been that if you read a scam artist, it's not a question of when, it's not a question of if there are, it's a question of when the truth comes out. So the problem was that when I could read people really well back then, I was just afraid that we would have lost our business 10 years later, and I would have corrupted a lot of minds going in too early and saying, whatever, these guys are super famous, popular, talk to them. And then later when the truth would come out, it'd be like, well, I learned from these guys from PJ, and then here's the worst part. Maybe they invested in their business or in their course, or, I've never endorsed a person over the last 20 years online. And people are like, how come? And I'm like, I don't endorse people because if I don't use them myself, you know what I mean? And I know for a fact that they're safe. I'm like, and you don't know how people change. So I'm like, I just don't put an endorsement just because. And
Too much at stake.
yeah, and I won't take a cutback of anything. So like, I don't care. I'm not like, oh yeah, like let me sell you this affiliate product. Like thousands of requests denied since the very early 2000s. So I've been out there for a long time to answer your question.
Jeez, wow. No, thanks for sharing. That's really interesting. It seems like when podcasting was the thing, you could have hit the gas, but you just knew that I would rather keep number one, my integrity, number two, the future reputation of my company and my name, rather than become the biggest podcaster in
Right,
the
and I
industry
couldn't
because I wouldn't
compete.
sacrifice people with clout.
Exactly, and I couldn't compete, right?
Because podcasting it's about the guest you have right at
Yes,
the end of the day.
exactly,
Let's not lie. And so
exactly.
you can't get around the bush.
Exactly. And if you can't compete, why go into war with someone knowing you're going to lose because you're not willing to
Yeah.
do certain things? It's like having a conscience and being a tobacco producer. You know, you're like, oh, my product's going to kill people. Or a drug dealer, and like, I don't want people to overdose on my product and be like, well, I'll sell you once a week, you know, and the guy's like, no, I'm an addict. I need this 10 times a day. You're like, well, you can't be
Yeah,
a successful drug dealer. Like, this is a bad, you know,
sure.
it's a bad concept.
Yeah, no, I rate that. I rate that. That's really awesome. Integrity. What I'm hearing there is the key of what we just said. What do you think about podcasting today?
I think it's the same garbage. Like,
Really?
I think that there's a large audience, right? That focuses. I mean, if look, the biggest guys in the podcast games are leading the industry the wrong way by allowing anyone a voice. So how can a small guy compete without big names? Like, how can a small guy go, I'm going to do a great interview here, and these people are of no relevance? You know, like they're just random people. In today's day and age, no one's going to Google that or look up this guy they don't know to make him famous in a podcast no one's heard about. So it's just not going to work. And once they end up on a large podcast, then they're automatically associated with the rest of the idiots. So, you know, I think one guy who's done a tremendous job in the online slash podcast from an informational standpoint without taking a bias of like kind of the wrong people has been the guy from Diaries of a CEO. I don't know if you've ever watched.
The Steve Bartlett.
I've seen his stuff, and like when I listen to it, it's a very like informational discovery type call, and it's not so much a like clout-based call. That's like I want to give you a lot of like exposure. What are you talking about? You know, there's like an educational format to it, and I would say to
Right.
me, this is what we attempted to create in 2007. But the noise, as we got bigger, basically corrupted that to the point where it was like we were too early at the game. You know, almost like there were 5 Instagrams before Instagram, but they were too early. You know, people weren't there listening to this. And so when I saw the writing on the wall that we were too early, I decided to pivot and go into a very blue ocean rather than a red one, as my ocean was becoming very red. I don't know if you're familiar with the red and blue ocean concept in marketing.
Right.
So I decided I'm going to focus on what I have significant expertise in, which is to teach about alternative assets like cars, watches, and investments online.
Yeah.
Something, again, way ahead of the trend. No one was talking about collector cars and watches in 2010. You know, people were talking about this in 2020 now, 10 years later. But I said, I'm going to get ahead and do that. And I started doing a lot of my work in terms of my teaching in business and philosophy through my books, Third Circle Theory, Radius, and Gated Choice. And I walked away from the blog format and kind of like that format. And I said, if someone really wants that knowledge, they'll find it in these books. And they understand the book format, the Audible format. They understand how to consume a book. It's not like a marketing gimmick. It's very black and white. And instead, I'm going to focus on the lifestyle component of the cars, watches, and alternative assets, which is something I've loved doing.
Yeah. No, I rate that. I respect that. It's really interesting you say that because it is an interesting game, podcasting. Like obviously a podcast. I really enjoy podcasting anyway. I'm a smaller podcast, but excited to see what happens because I just love it anyway. Do you believe then someone could be a podcast could grow and become effective, not necessarily because of not purely because of the guests that come on. Yes, you're going to need good guests, big guests, popular guests, but over time the interviewer themselves, the people buy into the interviewer and the way they have built a podcast, and so that grows over time? Or do you think it's purely because of the guests?
So, no, I think it's both, right? This is an interesting business question because it's a trend issue. So, societal trends, like I would say, if you started a podcast today, right, it doesn't mean that you can't become popular or say of good nature things that really
Sure.
like get people interested. There's two fundamental problems to that. The area is very crowded, and it would take you a very long time, meaning like a couple of
Mm.
years, to really start getting a trusted, recognized name in the game. And here's where this becomes an issue
Yes.
now. The podcasting genre is near its maturity stage. So you're basically going
Mm.
in a trend in a very busy space with not enough time to adapt and conquer. Like basically you don't have room to fail. You have to have like a lot of really good moves in a row with a lot of really effective luck, like with people saying yes when they wouldn't typically. And then in order to be able
Mm.
to even compete, let alone dominate. So in my view, when someone says, it's like the guy that says today, I want to do a YouTube channel, and I'm like, cool, what's it about? Cars. I'm like, okay, well, there's 9,000 car channels, and 6,000 of them are popular with like 1 million subscribers. Like, I don't see like the argument is even 1 million subscribers now, even if you reach it immediately, like and you get it, is not going to convert at the same dollar rate that it did back then. And the popularity standard is different. So that person that started back then had the capacity to really monetize that audience and carry on outside of YouTube and carry on with their name. But that new $1 million subscriber is a new like entry tier to being taken seriously. It's no longer the dominating tier. I remember when we started on Instagram
Sure.
in 2006, people thought like, why are you on Instagram doing motivational quotes and like talking about business and interviews? People are like, are you crazy? Like nobody cares about this. They want to see photos. And I'm like, no, people want to see this. And they're like, no, they don't. I had 300,000 followers accumulated, and that was a huge deal. Like people were like, oh my
Mm.
God, who is that guy? Like 300,000 followers for like a business page, like with lifestyle content.
Not coffee and eggs on toast.
Exactly, but look today. Like, look at a page that's got less than like 2 million followers, and you don't automatically go, "That's big." Like, whoa, who is that? I need to investigate this page. You kind of go like, okay, some mid-level guy is doing something. Like, well, I don't really care. Is it relevant to me or not? And I would argue that if someone has less than 100,000 followers, they're not even taken seriously. They're like, oh, this is the beginning of
Mm.
reach, so he's very small, which isn't necessarily true, but that's how people think. And so the argument is again the goalpost has moved up again based on the fact that some people on there have like 100 million followers, and that wasn't the case when the platform started.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, what I'm hearing you say is the classic, marketing concept of sophistication, right, and trends and markets. What I want to ask you, PJ, is I want to delve into a bit of your story, but first, this just popped into my mind, so I'd really like to hear what you think. I usually don't like this question because it's conditional, it's based on a few factors, but we'll flow with it anyway. We're talking about trends, we're talking about opportunities right now. I know from your story, it seems like you have capitalized on trends very well over your time, from the blogging days, podcasting days, when you jumped into banking. Obviously, that wasn't a trend,
Well,
but
no, it was.
you've
It
capitalized
actually it
on things.
was. It was the rise of
Okay.
it was the rise of retail banking expansion. So it was a trend.
Oh, between 80s and early 2000s.
Yes, exactly. Before the 2008 crash. Yeah, yeah. So there
Fair
was
enough
there
then.
was
So
a
banking,
reality there
blogging.
too.
Okay, nice. Banking, blogging. Um, so if you were getting started today, obviously forget about, of course, you could put yourself up to whatever you wanted to do today because of the skills and
Mhm.
knowledge you've developed over time, which you're going to leverage. But regardless of all that, if you were to look right now at the current world and markets, what opportunities are you seeing today that you'd capitalize on? Because obviously we're talking about agencies, okay, flipping heck, mad saturated, YouTube channels, Instagram. It feels like all these things, like even in the last 10 years or so, people have just been firing on. It's kind of evolving into this new world. What would you capitalize on right now?
So I'll tell you two things about starting up because I get asked this a lot. Like, what would you do today if you started over? What trends would you look for? What industries would you be in? This is something that really hit me during my banking era, and one of the reasons I got fired from banking, which was a very comfortable like salary, and bonus structure, and then I went back into banking. A lot of
Mm.
people don't know that, and I quit the second time. I quit the second time because of something that I try to teach younger people today, and it's that if you look 10 years ahead of where you are today, like 10 years further than today, and you see the
Yeah.
people doing the things today that you wish you're going to be doing in 10 years. You know, you're like, I love this influencer, I love this banker, I love my boss's boss maybe in a corporation, or I hate him, I think he's an asshole, you know, and it takes maybe 10 years to get that job, maybe the CFO of a company, maybe the VP of a company, whatever it is. Like if you commit 10 years like a slave, you'll be that guy, right? And if that guy doesn't look like someone you want to be, then why take a ride down a path where you're not going to want to get to a destination? Okay, so that's
Yeah, I
that's
like
that's
that.
the most important aspect of choosing not just the trend or the industry, but what you wish to commit to. A lot of people have said, with my banking background, why don't I make millions of dollars day trading and doing these things? Because my interests are not in day trading. My interest is in education and teaching. And so I have leveraged platforms that are teaching platforms that I've created, you know, books that I've written that teach. And as a result of that, I've gotten also very wealthy because I've gotten very good at it. So could I have been wealthier being a day trader? I'm sure, because I had a lot of background in it. I could have made more money. I had some money to put in. I could have taken my $2 million and instead of starting certain businesses, gone straight into trading and said, made, you know, 20, 30% a year and said, screw it, you know, like I'm really, really rich and I'm good. But if I look then, because I did that, I thought about real estate, I thought about day trading as professions, meaning as directions. And then I realized they weren't the directions I wanted to take, because 10 years from now, that's not what I wanted to do. So, but I knew that it didn't mean that I couldn't invest in real estate or also invest in stocks and take advantage of market conditions to make money. But it
Right.
wasn't what I wanted to commit my craft to. And I think one of the big things about me being very young is I had that awareness to say, I don't want to be a day trader. So even though I could make short money, let me not lose sight of the bigger picture. Let me do the big picture first. I can always make the short money later. It's not like the stock market's going away next year or opportunities are going away. You'll find some new way to make money, you know? And I think one of the big things is people have this fear of missing out all the time. You know, like, what if I didn't get in Bitcoin early? What if I don't get in Ethereum early? What if it's $1 million later? I'm going to regret it. You don't miss the shots you never took. I know that's not, I know that that's not, because they weren't yours to take. Does that make sense? Like it's okay. Like it's okay to not win, even though your friends won. I know people who are much dumber than me, who have made very simple investments in things that I didn't want to focus on, right? Like that they said, hey, I'm just going to put like 10 grand in this, and now they've got $20 million as a result of it. Is there a sense of like, wow, like that's fucked up, right? I worked so many years, right? I built this money, you know, like, and this other guy in 2 minutes, you know, earned maybe a fifth of my net worth within just making this decision, right?
Yeah.
But it's not how the world works. His experience isn't related to mine. And so this is one of the biggest issues about social media and the reach we have into seeing other people's lives, is just because we have a view into it, we believe that there's some type of correlation between their life and our life. So we'll justify things like, there's other 20-year-olds doing this, there's other 30-year-olds doing that. Well, that 20-year-old got rich in 3 years. That guy built his $100 million company in 5 years. And we use that as a
Mm.
standard, right? We said, this is the standard. Like, this guy did this in 5 years, that's my new standard. But the problem by doing that, one of the biggest problems, and this is huge, it's really huge, is that if you think about that, it's not the standard, it's the exception. And we're making it the standard because we're exposed to it so often, because that's our favorite influencer or not. For that
Sure.
reason, we basically standardize it when it's really the exception and not the rule. We don't say there's 80,000 people that did the same thing and all of them took 10 years. We go, the one guy I followed did it in 5. I feel like a loser because I did it in 10.
Mm.
Right? So
Yeah.
this is a very bad thing for young people today.
Crucial.
They're just stuck in this place, you know?
Yeah. So true. It seems like you actually answered probably the deeper question behind that, which is actually really important, which I really like. From a practical standpoint, let's say you were wanting to focus on, I don't know, it just feels like, because everyone talks about AI, you know, AI the next 10 years, jump into AI. Outside of AI, do you see what opportunities would you kind of go after?
Opportunity. I like someone going after AI. Are they a coder? Do they enjoy coding? Do they want to be in a code-based environment? Is this what
Yeah.
they enjoy? I mean, if someone wants to be an architect, are they going to drop that and go into AI? Like, or are they going to
Yeah, yeah, makes
leverage
sense.
AI as a tool in their field, maybe, and say, hey, I'm an even more innovative architect ahead of time. So I don't think of AI as a trend. I think of it as a tool that can be applied to any industry. And I believe that the most trend-driven people are not going to say, I'm going to change my profession because there's money to be made there. Instead, they're going to say, hey, how can I leverage this tool to be ahead of market? I mean, us as marketers, think about it. Like you're promoting a podcast. If a new social media comes up like TikTok, you can't ignore it. It's a tool. You're not going to go become TikTok
Yeah.
famous. You're going to say, how can I leverage TikTok to continue doing what I'm doing and get more attention out there and more eyeballs on it? But you're not going to say, I'm going to drop everything. I'm going to go dance on TikTok. And if I become TikTok famous, I'm going to be very excited about being TikTok famous, because then you're going to be like, I'm just dancing on video and attention is currency. And I'm so bored every week because I have to do a new dance and I don't like dancing. So the argument is, the idea that these are businesses when they're tools. Like we saw the e-com boom the same way. People said that was a trend. They were like, e-com's a new trend. Well, no, Amazon was that trend, right? Not the e-com boom. There was this middle like line thing where people were sold this idea that they could become e-com rich, like doing stupid shit. But think about it. It's not it's not possible to sustain a business model that is based on another business model like Amazon. It's not because of one reason, because someone else dictates the rules of your business. Meaning if Amazon bans you from the platform and you're drop shipping, well, how do your business is dead overnight. Like, oh fine, you can sue them, you can go after it, there's just, I'll sue you. The point that I'm trying to make is you can't build longevity off of such a weak
Yeah.
foundation. So when people would come to me and say, don't you want to start 10 e-com stores and make money? And I'm like, no, because I'm not looking for an extra 100 grand a month part-time. Like I don't care for that. Like I'd just rather get better at my business, make an extra 100K a month in my business. I can sustain that for 10, 15 years and build off of that. I can't sustain off of this side path that I take. So I'm not necessarily a believer that AI is the trend that people should drop their pants for and just run to. I believe that AI is a tool that some people, if you're a coder, certainly coding AI and going into these realms
Right.
of being able to decipher good AI versus bad AI, sure, all those things are very relevant because it's already in your industry. It's an evolution of your industry, right? However, if you're not, then I don't think I would tell someone you need to change your path in order to go there.
Yeah, yeah. Nice. So would a better way of saying this be, first of all, do the work in depth internally to actually know what direction you want to go into, first of all? Like you said, 10 years down the line, if I'm going to be the person who experiences X, Y, and Z, do I want to be that person? Do I want to be in the shoes of that person? And if you have a yes, then you now can look into the world, into the market, into whatever's booming and utilize that as a tool to get you there more efficiently, more effectively.
Yep, exactly. Like that's exactly what I'm saying. The more you
Beautiful.
focus on the craft, right, and are willing to commit to the craft, the less you're going to be distracted by the noise. That's
Mm,
what matters.
I love that. I love that. So, PJ, what I want to do is delve into a bit of your, I guess, evolution or your story. Grew up in Iran in the 80s, experienced quite a good lifestyle. Mom had a great job. I believe the grandfather was an army general.
Yeah.
Revolution happened. Things turned south. Lost a bunch of everything.
You're well informed. Someone's been doing the research.
We got it, man. Podcasters these days can't be jumping on a podcast with someone who's been on 10 podcasts and say, "What's your origin story?" But also France. And what I'm going to get to a question here. Um, Similar thing happened in France. Mom had a small business, working, things moving, but then lost a bunch of stuff again.
So not lost this time. This time voluntarily gave it up. When it came to Iran, it was taken from the revolution side. Like, and my
Okay.
father wasn't
Yes.
a help to that. So basically, he took my mom's stuff and basically left us. The on the France side, it was different because the opportunity to come to the States opened. In that opportunity, my mom voluntarily had to give up everything in order not to trigger the fact that we were coming to America to stay here. And she was like, I
Yeah.
just got to leave in 1 week and I can't take anything with me. So, I have to liquidate everything basically and take whatever I can. And she did. And
Right.
basically, here we were
Okay.
with 3 suitcases again in America and like 20 grand in our pocket.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like it was incredible just delving into your journey, your story, obviously packing up twice. And I know you shared some really cool insights about what that's taught you as a human,
Mhm.
especially as a child growing up and your mindset around success, life, money, what's possible. So I guess my question would be, I want to leave this open to the court. What top three events in your life have most defined your philosophy on life?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I can pick the top three. I can give you three that have been significant sources of kind of how I viewed the world. Uh,
Sounds great.
I don't know that they're my top three because I've never thought about it enough. I might be here for an hour to be
Sure,
like,
sure.
are these the best ones?
Well,
I think one thing that I shared on another podcast a while back was that one of the key things in all these scenarios where we were poor, going through these different countries, new places, etc. One thing my mom did really well that I think has been a big imprint on my life was that she's always chosen to live in better areas with less means, meaning like she would rather have a
mm,
studio in a nice high rise than a 4 bedroom in a ghetto location. Get it? Like, so one of the things that she's always shaped for me was that safety of environment and being exposed to people in your environment being better individuals is going to give you more aspiration and a higher hope of how to normalize success and not look at living in a nice 4 bedroom apartment in a nice high rise being something special. So, in other words, she was like, you're better off
mm.
understanding how the ivory tower works and why it works and be at the bottom level of it rather than be 10 miles down the street looking in an ivory tower thinking you're never going to get there, right? So she's always,
Wow.
even though we were very poor and it was a stretch to have an apartment there, she never went to like
Sure.
bad housing or like government assistance. She always said, I will do whatever it takes. I will eat less. I will sleep on the floor so my son can basically live in a place with me where he comes out and he's not worried for his safety. He's looking at richer people. He's seeing nicer cars. And this was something that I'm not sure because I've
Wow.
never talked to her about it. If subconsciously this was done like the one thing that I always tell people, because sometimes I make fun of poor people today, and they get very offended by that. And I'm like, poverty's in the mind, because I was poor too. But I never lacked class as a poor person, if that makes sense. Like, meaning I always had
Okay.
elegance in the sense that some people are buying a suit because it's their first job and they can't afford to pay good money for a suit, and that's okay because money is relative,
Mm,
right, to your position in life. But what's not okay is they just wear the ugliest suit from Target without paying attention to how they look. Versus my mom would tell me to go to Macy's, for example, and use coupons to make it the exact same price. So the point is
yeah.
not that it's more expensive or like she bought me a Hugo suit when everybody could afford a Macy's suit. No, it was a Macy's suit that was from Hugo. It was bullshit. But the point is that because of the coupons, it was the same price as the garbage you can buy at Target. And this is the mindset shift of like, when you're poor, you think like a poor person that I have to walk into stores that are affordable, like assuming that Walmarts and Targets are your better place to buy stuff because it's cheaper. But it's not always true. Like, I'm not saying that those places don't have better value on things most of the times, maybe for food and, for toys and things, but they generally aren't clothing places. And so, naturally speaking,
Mm,
you're probably going to have better luck trying to get rid of something at Macy's they want off on the clearance rack, and it's going to be a better product than what you get at Walmart on their regular rack. And people
mm,
don't think that way because poor people are like, I can't shop at Saks. That's not for me. So they go to Macy's when really they could go to Saks and get on the clearance rack again top designer stuff 80% off. Like they don't think that way. They're not value buyers. They're price buyers. So this is something huge that my mom taught me very young, right? Like to not just assume that you can't
yeah.
afford something, get interested in it. That's the same thing that allowed me to buy a Lamborghini on a 9 to 5 job. People were like, that's impossible. I was
Mm,
like, no, it's not. There's a way to buy a used Lamborghini and actually get away with it. That gave birth to like 90% of my businesses later if I wouldn't have had that
yeah.
mentality.
Yeah.
The
Crazy.
second thing I think that was super important.
Can I ask a quick question first before you jump into two? A quick follow up there, which is super interesting because what I'm hearing there, which really piqued my interest, is your mom. Because where do you think that came from in your mom? Because what I was saying is, you said Obviously, I know your mom probably experienced a nicer lifestyle in Iran
Correct.
before
Yeah,
obviously
exactly.
losing a
Yeah.
lot and experienced poverty. And you think that the mindset that was developed there gave birth to, even though she lost everything and was poor when you had moved, like, for example, what I'm trying to say is a poverty mentality wouldn't have made the choice to live in a nicer place in the lower area. It'd be like, what can I get with what I have in the
Correct.
in
Yeah.
the nicest place? Your mom, being poor, made a different choice. Do you think that was birthed in the mindset that she developed?
I think a little bit there because I always say I've written a lot of book on human consciousness and the evolution of man to awareness and self-awareness, and I'll tell you that generally speaking, when the mind has experienced a better experience, like when you've experienced a Ferrari or let's say a Lamborghini, or you've experienced nicer clothing or better food at a nicer restaurant, it's very hard to go backwards. So you'll find,
Yeah, okay.
bridges to kind of like, I need to go back to that restaurant, but maybe I'll go on a day where it's 50 off. Like I can't afford to eat there every day, but maybe they have Mondays, they're slow, they'll give 50 off, and that's when I'll go, right? But your mind's very difficult to like now accept you have to go look in the hood, and live there, even though you used to live in a palace, right? So usually you'll be like, fine, I can't afford a palace, like I can't force my way, but what's the closest thing to a palace I can get, And you're like, well, it's this studio apartment in the bumfuck nice residence, but it's at the bottom floor, and you're like near the janitorial closet, and you're like, well, that's the only place I know to shop, right? Because I don't know how to go to the hood and make a contract with hood people to live here and worry about if I get out of my house, I'm going to get shot or there's drugs around or something. So, generally speaking, I think that once your mind evolves, it's hard to like go backwards again. And that's been a huge part, huge part of my success has been to constantly push the edge of what's possible so my mind can't settle for less and constantly go up.
I respect that. That's awesome. All right, that makes sense. All right, number two.
I'd say that this, yeah. So it's the second thing I think that's been a pivotal part of my kind of journey in terms of, like, really. And we were talking about this earlier, not comparing yourself to others. I remember we used to walk.
Yeah.
We didn't have a car, so we took the subway all the time. Everywhere. And this was in Paris, so it's not like you needed a car specifically, but it was nice to have a car. We just couldn't afford one. So what we did is we used to take the metro for about an hour back and forth from her business to our apartment, etc. And something that would happen is every like once a month on a Sunday, she would take me to like a buffet type restaurant called Casino in France. It was like a big, it was called Casino, but it wasn't a casino. It was just like what they basically served. Like you would pick whatever food you wanted off the buffet, and it was like in already pre-made plates, and you would eat that, and you would pay for it based on leaving out. And we were limited on what we could do, but this was one of my favorite things to do because we didn't usually go out to eat because we couldn't afford it. So this was like the treat of the month. And one thing that would happen is to get there, we would go, we had this religious thing of going, even if it was snowing, raining, because we had to walk for like 10 minutes of it, and Paris had 4 seasons, so it's not like you don't get any snow or rain or anything. So it was cold, and we're walking, we were taking a bus sometimes, taking a train, and we would get there. And sometimes, it was very, very cold, and it was very inconvenient to go. The journey there wasn't always worth the outcome. At that moment, we're looking at it, we're like, are we sure we want to go? We don't want to postpone this to next week. And she always said, no, we have to go because we agreed to go. And this commitment idea that even if there's an obstacle in the way, you don't shy from your commitments was something that really stuck to me. And I'll tell you the third lesson, literally in the same lesson too, but that was a big thing because I was like, okay, so you have to hold your word. And your word wasn't to me because I was willing to be flexible there and say, we can go next week. The word was to herself. She had promised me I would go once a month. It had been a month and I could go. So she kept that promise. And as someone that learned this, because I always keep my word regardless of what I do, I realized that you're born with no words and you only die with your words. So at the end of the day, when you're in the grave, you're not taking anything with you. So your impact comes from what you've told people and what you've done for people. So the argument is what you've told people has led to what you're going to do for them. If you're like, I'm going to help you like become successful, and then you don't do it because you make empty promises, people won't believe you. So the argument was always that keeping your word was key, and more so not about others saying you're a liar or not, but to yourself. So you can never call yourself a liar or someone who compromised. But in that same walk to this very, at the time, famous to me restaurant, I would always walk past more expensive restaurants and see a ton of like rich people in Paris, like eat at these restaurants that were much more boutique-like and They had very nice, expensive fur coats. This was a thing back then, and people were sitting there, and we were walking, and of course they had these glass windows where you could see inside and out. And these restaurants were much more convenient, much closer to the subway, much better for us to eat at, but certainly we couldn't afford to eat there. It was very expensive. So one thing that occurred then is I never had any sense of jealousy to why can't we eat there. And my mom never made it seem like this wasn't for us. She never said things to me like, oh, this isn't for us. We're not supposed to go there. She always gave me a plan to
Mm.
get there. She said, well, if you help me at the office and you make X amount of money, we can eat there. And I was like, oh, okay, so there's a path to eating there. It's not for me, right? And I think this was something
Yes.
really, really important because she has never, ever demonized success or other people's success or
Big.
other people's lifestyle ever. Like she's never said this guy has this. God, I wish we had this car. Like she never says like, oh, this is a nicer apartment. I wish we lived there. And it was always like there's a path to it, but here's where your commitment is going to help us get there, or don't worry about what you're not willing to work for, basically. And I think very young, like 'cause I was very, very young, I still always kind of retain that to if I see something is not necessarily for me now, doesn't mean it's not for me. If there's real interest and commitment,
Wow.
it can be for me. It's just not for me now. And I think that's important too because it doesn't become a distraction. Like certainly when I was young, I of course wanted $1 million cars, but I understood that having $100,000 car was more for me now, right? Didn't mean that that
Mm.
$1 million wasn't available at some point, that I would get there or not. There was never a fear in my mind that working hard would not get me there, but there was the reality that it wasn't my concern at that moment, but I should truly appreciate someone else who has that power that I wish to have one day, instead of looking at it as demonizing it like, oh, dude, I'm so jealous you have the nicest car in the block for $1 million. It was more the difference to say, well, wait a minute, you have the nicest car for $1 million, and that's amazing that a human has been able to accomplish so much that they can spend what I don't have in my bank account then on a car. Like, and your watch is 100 grand? Holy shit. Like that's crazy. Dude, I'm
Yeah.
so impressed by the fact that you have been able to do this. And sometimes people said, well, his parents did that. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Someone suffered for that position. And I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not going to demonize someone giving to their children. Like, why do we work? Like a lot of people have things against trust fund kids. I always tell people, I'm like, someone suffered for the money. It's not a question of like if you did or not. What do you want? You want to work so your kids don't have to suffer through the same realm. And a lot of dumb people say
Yeah.
things like, my kids are going to work at a minimum wage and they're going to learn from McDonald's. Why would a wealthy individual who values time want to put their children to hardcore labor, which is irrelevant to the foundation of success, because labor is not always directly correlated to success or long hours? Why would you want to do that to your child? Teaching someone the essence of working for something does not mean teaching them to waste their time on meaningless skills so they understand labor. But a lot of people are stuck in their own heads that the way they became successful was through labor, so their children will have to go through labor, even though today people can make more day trading or doing something on the internet or selling stuff on the internet, even selling nudes on the internet and making 20 times more, right, than they would
Mm.
if they worked a profession. And what I'm saying is they're not adapting to how times have evolved, so they're thinking in their old age. And that's why people still send their kids to college thinking it's a good idea, even though the kid has no idea what the hell he wants to do in life.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, makes sense. It's really interesting. So what I'm hearing you say is it sounds like those experiences with your mother kind of obviously as we're a kid, those early experiences are crucial to fundamentally solidifying a lot of those early beliefs of how we're going to see the world. So those little moments were instilling that mindset in young PJ of, oh, I don't have this now, but there's not the limiting belief of, oh, that's not for me. Oh, we'll never achieve that. That's not for my type of people or my age or my race or whatever. But oh, there's someone's achieved that. There's a path to it. It's possible. So there's no those limiting beliefs weren't crippling you
Mhm.
as you grow up. Very interesting.
Correct.
Nice. And did you say that number 3 was embedded in that already?
Yeah, I'm saying that basically the whole idea of not comparing yourself to others and having a path was something that literally was the most, I think, one of the most important things I've ever learned, to not demonize success.
Yeah, yeah. Quick pivot. I have another question following up on that on your life. But as we've just talked about, I'm really interested in your thoughts. We've just talked about the beginning, and we talked about now about not comparing yourself to other people, not judging your now based on someone else's 10 years down the line. Obviously, social media, especially, kids growing up nowadays, my generation, growing up looking at stuff on social media, looking at the lifestyle, looking at people's highlight reels and making it the norm, and that's our world view now of this is such attached to my identity. I should be able to achieve this. If I'm not doing this, I'm a loser. This is the standard. That comparison, if you were to talk to your child, well, obviously there's a prerequisite. I mean, I'm not sure what your view is of how you would let your child use social media, but if they're on social media, what would your advice or teaching be to them to escape and not play the game of the comparison social media rat race of what you should be doing in life, where you should be? How do you escape that? How do you make sure you're not playing that game?
Information without context is not information, it's entertainment.
Hmm.
Try to like really deep dive into that in your mind. Like information without context is entertainment. So if you can decipher what is real education and what is real information, right? Like that I'm supposed to take in consideration for my value system, rather than I'm being entertained by a meme on the internet. Half of the internet now, which pretends to be news, right? Like, or information on how something happened, is nothing more than entertainment for a click. And while you cannot teach maybe a child to not be on social media at all or to not read something, you can teach him how to read into something so they are not poisoned by their value system, is not poisoned by their misunderstanding of the quote. So a child will see a headline that will say guy became a millionaire in 23 days and will view that as entertainment, right? Versus a child that's not trained will view that as information or a path, right?
And creating a value system.
Correct. And like this is now the norm. TikTok is 10 seconds. This is now 23 days to become a millionaire. I'm not a millionaire in 60 days. What the fuck is wrong with me? In 90 days, I want to commit suicide. In 120 days, what's going on? I have new friends because it's not working. And I'm, going down this spiral of decline rather than progressive incline. And then the only other thing is everyone else's life is none of your concern. We can learn from them, but doesn't matter. Like, even if they're very successful or not. Like, you know how many people go ask business advice from a billionaire? You know how stupid they are for doing that? Like on podcasts, they ask billionaires how they would change things. Well, here's the thing. If you're not solving $1,000 problems, your scale of understanding can't fathom solving billion-dollar problems. Asking a billionaire who solves billion-dollar problems in his head or has done that, right? It is the most counterproductive act of teaching someone new how business works, right? But that's like, these are the questions you ask super rich people, and you're like, how'd you do it, dude? Now, instead of asking them, how did you make your first 10 grand? What was the business you used for that? That's very relevant to an audience, saying the majority of people will want to know that. We asked them like,
Yeah.
oh, how'd you make your first billion? How'd you make your first 100 million? Where was, right? This is where entertainment becomes a leading factor of podcasting today, right? It's like it's about that catchphrase. It's about the hotness. Like, what's that hot topic that's going to go viral? Not the 10 grand. No one's going to talk about, why are you talking to Mark Cuban about something he was doing 30 years ago? Who cares? Talk to him about now. He just bought this. He's on this podcast to promote this new basketball team, right? Like, so the concept that people don't understand is the reason they fail with social media is because they don't know how to filter information, right? And they don't know what to ask. And I tell you, this happened to me in business too. When I started online, I was going to give up. It had been 4 years I was working for free. I wasn't making any money, and the difference between me and other people, I knew how to ask the right questions. I went out with one of my very good clients at the time, who happened to be one of the most successful penny stock traders in the world. And he, Tim Sykes, I mean, he's a good friend of mine, he's a nice guy. He does very well in the infotainment, like selling courses and things online, and he's done it for a long time. And, I always saw that people don't like him because he does penny stocks and whatever, but he's legitimate in his space. Maybe it's not. And trust me, I did a lot of research with people. That guy's legit. So the thing that happens though, he may not be liked, but he's legit. So what occurred with him is I went to lunch with him because he was my client in my other business. And something that occurred that was really interesting is I knew how to ask the right question. The right question to him, which we were in the same industry, I was very new and he was not. I was on the verge of quitting. I had made no money in the online space for 4 years, and I had overworked and outworked every person I knew in that space. And I was like, it's not working. So clearly I'm an idiot, right? Like I don't know anything. And all I would see on the internet is these other imbeciles pretending to make 300 to 400K a month. Like I'm going to publish my statement report and everything. And the first thing Tim says to me, he says, these guys are all scamming. They're all full of shit. And I was like, okay, well, what makes me think you're not scamming, right? Because you're making the same kind of money. So he takes out his phone, he shows me his PayPal, and he's like, I made 30 grand worth of lunch today, just selling courses without me being there. And I'm like, bro, I haven't made 30 grand in 4 years. Like, what's the story, right? What am I missing? And here's something interesting. I asked him the right question, which I'll never forget. I asked him, how much money did you make on year 4? I didn't ask him, how much money are you making now? He just showed me he made 30 grand while having an hour lunch with me. How much money were you making on year 4? And you know what he said to me? He said, I didn't make any money till year 12. So I was like, wait,
Great.
what? So now here's what happened. The following few months, I made 30 grand. The year after, in that few months, not at once, just over a couple of ebooks sold, etc. And then the year after, I made 400 grand. So here's the context. Now, I knew I was twice as ahead as Tim Sykes because it took him 12 years to do what I did in 5. Get it? So the context,
After that good question.
right? The context mattered, right? I could have said, how much money are you making now? He would have said, I'm making X amount of millions. And I would have said, well, I'm a loser, right? I'm a total freaking failure because you figured out how to do this, right? And clearly, I don't know how to do this. So what do you know that I don't know? But instead, I asked a question that was relevant to time, not a question that was relevant to my ego, right? It was what were you doing when you were at my stage? And he was like, well, I wasn't making anything for 5 more years. So I'm like, holy shit, the next year when I made money, I was like, do you know what it means to make 6 figures after only 5 years, right? Versus saying, do you know what it means to make 6 figures when everyone else is making 10 million, right? That's a very different contextual feeding your belief system something, saying hey, we're going to make it versus why are we doing this? We're clearly not good at this.
Yeah, no, I love that. Understanding that the social media game is placing information on the altar of entertainment and knowing the difference between the two. That's great. I love that story, man. Thanks for sharing. What I want to ask you, PJ, I was really interested when I was doing a bit of research on your story, is that I know when you got into the banking days, back in the banking days, you obviously found some great success, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but what I was hearing you say in that journey is your independent, free-spirited nature kind of often clashed with the corporate,
All the time.
environment. So what I want to ask you, BJ, maybe this is going to tie into just practicality, but also philosophy and general things, is do you think some people are just naturally suited to corporate life while others like yourself are driven to break free? Or do you believe actually no one is truly meant for a culture like that, a corporate culture, and only a few are bold enough to challenge it? And
So you said something really interesting.
overcome it.
Yeah, you said something about how this ties into philosophy, and that has a lot to do with that. So look at corporations and working a job like a religion. And I know this is going to be controversial that I say this, but look at it exactly like a religion.
Controversy.
All right, interesting comparison, right? Both of them are structural pieces to how to live a life, how to work somewhere, and how to live a life. Both of them can teach you skills by creating focus points. Both of you can leave you trapped if you don't evolve past them. So here is the ideology behind it. If you work a job, it's because you lack a skill, so you can't start or find value in the marketplace by selling your skill independently. So you have to go basically work under someone else's umbrella who says, trust my name, except that I'm going to trust PJ to do the work at his job, right? And I'm going to pay 10 PJs to basically do this job. They can take on 100 clients, but it's our name you're trusting, not PJ. You don't even know who PJ is, doesn't matter. He works for our bank, right? Under our structure, our model, and we guarantee your money's safe, right? It's no different than me saying, I'm your personal guarantor financially. Like, I trust you, so give him money, but if he don't pay you, I pay you, right? Like, so someone goes, well, I know PJ has X amount of money. If this guy loses my money, PJ will pay me. He won't lose his reputation over it. So there's trust, right? That's what a job is. Most people seek a job and they think in the job, they ask themselves, well, I'm not going to build someone else's dream. I'm not going to work there and like help them. Well, you're not helping anybody else. You're getting paid to work there. So obviously you're getting your own dream built, right? Like you need money to build your dream and it ain't free. So a lot of times people are like, well, I want this dream lifestyle. It's got to start somewhere and you're fucking not doing it for free. So you're not working there because you believe McDonald's cause is the best thing in the world and you can't wait to feed the poor. You're working there because you're getting a wage and you're too stupid to know how to get a better wage. So at that moment, that's the best wage available to you. And that's the job you take. That has a lot to do with belief, right? That has a lot to do with skill. You could say I have skills or I have no skills. If you're an immigrant that barely speaks English, doesn't want to learn the language, has no skill really to provide, maybe a retail job or something very mundane or boring or easy, like assisting people purchase clothes or to assist them in picking up an order at McDonald's, might be the best opportunity for you to make money right now because you have zero skills, right? So the real contextual issue with why you work at McDonald's is your lack of skills, not because you're a bad person or you're an idiot. It's just because you don't want to learn new skills. What happens though is in jobs, you become dependent on the money. And if you never went to that job to learn a skill, you're unlikely to develop more skills because you're not even conscious that you need to build skills and constantly market yourself at the next job. So you're in your head, you're like, well, I'll just stay here till someone quits and I'll get promoted. But that's not how you should look at jobs. It's like, what skill did I learn this last year? Nothing? Then why do I work here? Let me go work somewhere else where I can learn a skill. So I typically tell people, even if you work in the service industry, like as a waiter, or if you work, for example, at a car dealership, it's better than working at a retail place for two reasons. One, waiters learn servicing and the fact that their performance is directly tied to their pay, right, via tipping. And then on the other side, I mean, in the US, I'm saying, I know in Europe it's different, but then you have the other side of things, which is that if you work at a car dealership, your performance is based on sales, service, the psychology of sales, and you're learning a skill, right? Sales is a very powerful skill you can learn for any aspect of any business. So these are, even though, you know, people don't like car salesmen, well, they're learning a skill. So I would love to have my kid work in sales, you know, where they're forced to work under pressure and learn these kind of like strategies, right? So that's a very important guideline to how someone works. And the same occurs through religion. Religion is the baseline for societal conduct. So basically the evolution of religion is government and the evolution of government is capitalism. So if you look at this evolution in this one sense, is that we basically learn the doctrine of functioning as a good neighbor. Then we look at the doctrine of integrating into society where tips, or should I say donations, are not optional. They're called taxes, right? And punishment is not once you die, it's called the police and prison, right? And then what happens is we become more and more integrated. And then as we evolve, again, past that, we realize that the real power doesn't come from government, but the money behind government and who's funding that. And then we realize the more money we have, the more impact we have on rules, guidelines, and the doctrine so others don't bother us, right? Rich people set the mood so that poor people don't bother them. They're like, this is how I want to do business. I have $100 million. I'm impacting this government. Change this law so I can do business this way and get out of my way. I made enough money to deserve that. And that's the evolutionary tract that societal concepts take from religion to capitalism. So this is the war that's going on across the globe right now. Like all the wars going on are over capitalism. And the only reason they're holy wars in a way, like Christianity versus other religions, is primarily based on the fact that Christianity, I'm not Christian to be fair, I don't follow any religion, is the only progressive and the only dynamic religion that follows like very closely with societal structure that allows capitalism to take place. And because of that, it's an adopted Western philosophy that looks like that's what they're embodying on the world and trying to basically convert everyone in the world to do this crap. But it's not about that. It's that they want to convert everyone in the world to one currency, which is money. Like they want everyone to basically be on the same playing field. And they can't, so they're using this model to go forward. But nonetheless, this is another topic for another time. The point that I'm trying to make here is that if you're looking at the overall scope of your own philosophy towards work, you have to pick jobs you really want to be in specifically, that you're going to learn a skill, and you have to understand that at some point, these skills are going to outweigh allowing someone else to market them for you, right? Like in a job, like meaning you're that good at something that my bank selling my service to someone is a disservice to me, right? I'm too expensive for the bank to pay now. So my only guideline is how can I use these services and basically sell them myself. Now, leaving the bank would mean maybe a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 5 years of learning how to sell these services myself without the big name behind me, and how do I take these skills and apply them somewhere else? And that scares people because that would include like maybe not having enough money saved, giving up the lifestyle you've earned, having to downgrade your car, having to maybe make some sacrifices, not go on vacation for a couple of years. And these things scare people. So they typically say, well, I'm getting promoted here. I'm earning a good wage. It's good enough. And they're using their lack of emotional intelligence to connect their wage and their lifestyle to their skill when it's not proportionate. So like clearly what I was extravagant in banking and I drove Lamborghinis when everyone else drove black sedans. I kept trying to convert all of my peers, VPs in banking, into this one mentality. I was like, you guys could have Lamborghinis. You guys are morons. Like, why aren't you driving Lamborghinis and Ferraris? And one day I kept pushing this narrative that you guys just don't understand money. You need to do this and that. And then I had my orange Lamborghini parked across 10 black sedans, like Lexuses, Mercedes, and everything. And I realized, I'm like, they're not crazy. They're the ones that are right. I'm the one that doesn't belong here, not the other way around. There's only one orange Lamborghini in that crowd. There's 10 black sedans. They're in the right place. I'm not, right? Like, so it's like me trying to convert the space to be like, you guys have to see the world from my view. It's better. I guarantee you'll go further. And they're like, I don't think you understand where you are, kid. And I'm like, and I clearly don't. I'm better than all of you guys. I have this better car. But in my head, at that moment, I was like, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not better than them. Maybe I've outgrown my space, right? I want to be in a space where there's 10 other Lamborghinis next to me and not 10 black sedans, and people aren't afraid to be expressive and people are pushing themselves to the next limit. And it's clearly not fucking here, right? So I'm going to have to find something new to entertain myself. And either it's going to be another job somewhere because I need a wage, or if I have the skill, then fuck it. I'll go take a chance and be a free bird and see what I can do with it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, I'm hearing you say the underpinning two things of the question: are some people suited and naturally born for a corporate culture, or can anyone? It's not for anyone. Is two things: skill issue, and then the second thing I'm hearing underneath it is it's actually, I guess, a courage issue because the mindset to, like you said, when the skill outweighs someone marketing it for you, the courage that takes is pretty huge. So the skill and the courage combined can lead anyone to move forward from that.
Right, and it's a progressive journey. Listen, if you're a kid and you're like, I don't want to work for someone
Doesn't
else,
happen tomorrow.
I have no skills, I don't know what to do. That's a stupid mentality too. Being in business without a
Sure.
without a path is idiocity at its best because you're wasting time without actually making money and learning a skill somewhere. But in your head, you're so convinced you don't want to work for people. I had a kid here the other day, like looking at my car collection, and he was like, I was like, what jobs have you had before? And he's like, oh, no, I don't work jobs. And I was like, why not? He's like, well, like I don't want to work for someone in 30 years. And I'm like, why would working a job entail you work there for 30 years? Why is it such extreme, like if I work a job, I'm stuck there 30 years? The average person leaves their job every like 7 months. Why is it that you're in your head, you have a 30-year journey to being paralyzed in a job? But this mentality isn't real because every time I was like, what'd you do? Like, what businesses you own? Nothing. I just been floating, trying to do e-com. I lost money. I tried to day trade. I lost money. I'm like, yeah, man, it's not the issue is not the business. The issue is your head. Like you're just not committing to anything because you're looking for quick money and it ain't working. Again, comparing themselves to this day trader bought a Bugatti by doing this in 10 days. Again, entertainment versus real education.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. I love that, man. That was packed. Sheesh. My head is like pounding here. I love it. Man, this has been awesome. PJ, I've got so many questions. We could go on forever. But there are two questions I want to kind of boil down to before we leave. Kind of, they're both hitting, I guess, two different angles. First one, I know you're a smart man. You've been in the US close to 30-ish years or so, maybe more.
A little bit less
Um,
actually, about since 1995, I want to say. So almost, yeah, 2000, like almost
just
shy of
under
30 years. Yeah.
30-ish years. So obviously, you've seen in your period the country, the country evolve. I know you're a smart man. You're a smart man with understanding of the world, understanding of wealth. Do you see yourself staying in the United States for as long as you can, or where do you see the US going, and how are you personally preparing or thinking about the future?
So I don't think the US is gonna lose being the US. So, and the reason for that is
Okay.
because as long as the currency, the US dollar, is backed by the strongest military in the world, that's basically like what backs it. It's not gold anymore, so it's just that. It's our way or the highway kind of thing. That's the reality of it. I know it
Yeah.
doesn't sound very exciting,
Who's the boss?
well, right. But that's also why the U.S. is in such a global position for defense, right? And it gets involved in every war because that's the silent agreement it has with the majority of countries that support it. It's like, hey, we do the fighting. We do the putting the weapons there in the world, and you guys just do this other stuff. You make grains, you make clothes, you make this stuff, and you import it here for our people to basically pay taxes so we can make more military shit. The argument is, the first thing is, there has been a lot of changes fundamentally in the US, and there has been a very significant war on culture in the US. But I still think the US fundamentally, having seen, lived, and also interacted in business in a lot of other countries, including great countries like the UK, Europe, the Middle East, and also looking at some form of business in Asia that I didn't actually pursue. There is still a fundamental higher level of freedom here than there is anywhere else in terms of autonomy of business. The quality of life is not, like I will say this, like the food is not. Everything is basically a business. So we're like a giant mall in the world. It's like the best mall you can go to globally.
Yeah, wow.
You can buy better Ferraris here than you can in Italy. Like you can have better food here if you're rich enough to have it. So it's like a mall. Like it's not like really like, but the average milk you buy on shelf will give you cancer in 5 years. And cancer is a business in America. It's not a business in the UK. Like so. All I'm saying is that it is because pharmaceuticals are a business here, hospitals are a business here, doctors' gowns are a business here. Every aspect of America is a business. That's why everyone can get rich here, because you can come in and be like, I want to create new gowns for medical professionals, and there are 600 types of places that would be honored to buy it from you. And in another country, they'd be like, why would I invest more money in like gowns that are fancier and because it's not a business for them. They're like, well, my gowns do the job. Like, they're good. So, again, everything in America is a business. Any person who's here that doesn't believe that is an imbecile. The thing is, this country is basically for hire, even if its defense systems are for hire. That's why other countries give us goods in exchange for protection, right? Like, so everything in this business is basically a business. Everything in this country is a business. So if we look at things like that, I think that the cultural issues that are going on in the world right now, specifically dooming the US, are more issues around information and disinformation than there are about viewpoints. So if I, like again, because people can decipher
Interesting.
information and from reality, from fake news, from everything else, there has been a fake culture war going on here that isn't really a culture war. It's basically isolated incidents who are spread across as a general consensus agreement. The majority of the United States is in the center, but there is a very loud scamming voice on the left and a very loud scamming voice on the right, on the far right and the far left, that basically are not normal people, but they're the only ones shouting. So the middle is like, I'm just living my life, leave me the fuck alone. Everyone else on both sides is like, no, these people are becoming transgenders. Then the other side is like, everyone should do this and everyone should be religious. You have all these issues on both sides of the coin that aren't really issues anymore to the centric population, right? but you have outdated voting systems, not voting machines, you have outdated voting systems that were good when you had low population, records, but now you have high population records. It worked when you had different people living in different states. That's not viable anymore because the majority of people live in 3 to 4 states in America, And also the size of our country is the equivalent of 50 countries in Europe. So between where I live, Boca Raton and Fort Lauderdale is the size of Switzerland. When you think that way, you can even leave the state of Florida in 2 hours, but you can live the country in Switzerland in 30 minutes to be in France, Germany, or Italy. It's a completely different understanding that when someone says to me well, in Switzerland, we have better food, I argue that, well, in Boca Raton, we have better food than the hood in Sarasota, but Boca Raton is the size of Switzerland. So are we comparing a city to a country? Of course, you can take a population of 700,000 people and be like, well, I'd be like, well, that's half the state of Florida. What the hell's wrong with you? Why would I compare that to an entire country, the U.S., and be like, the food across the U.S. is terrible? So the argument I'm trying to make here is that fundamentally, I don't think that the U.S. is going anywhere, and I do think these issues have to get resolved, and I think they'll get resolved faster once we hold media accountable, more so than we hold politicians accountable. And this is the problem. Media has shifted because Facebook is unregulated. Does that make sense? So Facebook can spread a lie, or X can spread a lie, or Instagram can spread a lie with no consequence, because it's user-created content, right? And the news is trusted content from experts who now have to say outlandish things to try to keep up with narratives found on social media that aren't real. So they feed into that social media narrative when really it's not in the best interest of anybody for any reason but their ratings. And so it just doesn't make sense. And partially, I think that this is the transformation the country needs, not so much issues that they're talking about on either side of the coin that aren't really, like they'll say things like, oh, Democrats want to take your guns, Republicans want to give you more guns. Neither party is accurate on that statement. Neither party is taking your guns, neither party is banning your guns. But they hit on this one narrative, that scares people. And then people are one-issue voters when the issue is not even real. It's not even a real issue. It's not even a problem. Why are we even talking about this? But we're not. And the problem is, it's just become very convenient to use social media as this weapon. And it becomes very dangerous because you don't know who's behind the entertainment, and people can't decipher education from entertainment. So back to the same point again, that is the biggest problem,
Yeah, great perspective. Do you ever wonder or consider if these kind of culture wars that we're seeing in the West, specifically in the US, keep going the way they're going? We're not seeing progress, like you said, media accountability and regulation, and it's just going down the snowball, combined with the fact that, like you said earlier, the US dollar being backed by military power, and I don't know, next 20, 30 years, economies, government, like China, Russia are going to just keep developing. Do you see those kind of eventually tipping to the point where US even changes, or
So is it
do you kind of
possible?
hold hope somewhere?
Well, no, I'm not all hopes. I'm a realist in life, right? I believe you make enough money as you can.
Sure.
So you make money in the US, then you take your ass to a foreign country and you basically sit there and enjoy life, because you have a higher quality of life. That's how it works. I think anyone who's smart, anyone who's rich eventually leaves the US for a second home in London or second home in somewhere else backed by the US, but not the US, generally, and lives very well. As long as they don't have to be in business, so they don't have to basically get on other people's toes or become an enemy to the state or something in that regard in a foreign country. But for me specifically, I don't believe that it's all hopes or not. I think there's a lot of fundamental changes that are going to take place in the next maybe 2 decades or so in the US. I would even see potentially a 2-country solution, being like a divided US into 2 different sectors. I don't know how that would work, but I'm saying clearly the views on each side don't seem to be jolted by the other side, So basically saying you live here, under, I don't know how that works under one presidency, under 2 presidencies, I don't know. So what I'm saying is I see these as possibilities and as unfortunate possibilities, having seen like how good the US was in in the 80s, into the 90s, into the 2000s. But historically, one of the reasons we think the environment is deteriorating is primarily because we don't pay attention to history. So, like, to give you context, a lot of times we would look at the riots that occurred, during the 2020s for the George Floyd murders or some of these, Black Lives Matter issues and things that, were all bullshit anyways. But we look at these things as, hey, there's destruction going on and there's chaos and there's disorder, right? But if we really look through history, the US has been founded on such disorder and misconduct for decades. Previously the Koreans in LA, so there are a lot of history you can look at, and you can see literally on the dot these things repeating themselves every decade. And the argument is, if you do the math, fine, they were looting a lot of stores, a lot of people got hurt, etc. But a lot of people got killed in the 80s. So the argument is less people got killed this time. So is this a better event because it got more destruction, less human lives? A worse event because it was more televised, and back then we only had televisions, we didn't have smartphones, so we couldn't see the destruction, right? So the scale of our minds in what we're being exposed to now is significantly more, because of the access. Like people right now are looking at what's happening in Gaza, which is a disaster, right? Like a disaster. These poor people are getting massacred. I don't care what side of the coin you're on. People shouldn't be killed at that level. Doesn't matter. But they're looking at that and they're saying this is what's happening in 2024. And I'm like, this has always been happening. You just didn't have a smartphone to see it. This has been the norm, right? Like this has been the norm. You didn't have that many smartphones in Iraq back then. You didn't have as much leverage to see the atrocity. But it doesn't mean it wasn't there. It's technically worse. So what I tell people is the scope of your understanding of the situation may seem worse, but if you really statistically look at the deaths, the cleansing of certain countries and certain arguments, certain wars over things that don't make any sense, even though we don't have maybe documented footage of every aspect because the opposition didn't have smartphones, right? Like a phone was just a phone and it made a phone call. It didn't actually create a video series on TikTok, there's a very different dynamic to how information spreads today. And unfortunately, people are believers that this information is new, when in reality it's seen for the first time, but it's nothing new. So this is a really big problem, is that people are basically in information shock today of things that they didn't understand. I mean, think about food too. We now have research that shows how food is basically cancer in America, right? Like if you eat this,
it's horrible.
if you eat this Diet Coke, you're gonna die of pancreatic cancer, blah, 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 and all these things. Like historically, we now have data knowing that. And the only reason we now are more cautious or aware of it is because people are making video notes of it, right? Like, hey, like I'm showing you this is the report, and they're spreading it. Before, if you didn't catch the special in 2020, you didn't know any of this. Like they did a report, and if you didn't pay attention at a channel at 8 p.m. on a Sunday, you couldn't even rewind the channel and watch it the next day. So that was it. You weren't even recording it. You missed it. Oh my God, you missed it. I never got to see it. Maybe they'll do another one in 3 years. You're like, well, that sucks, right? But now you're like, I just got the cliff notes on TikTok, on Instagram. This is poison, that's poison. So does it mean that what they're putting in Coke today is worse than what they were putting 20 years ago? It's the same thing. You're just aware of the fact that it's giving you cancer and has been giving you cancer for a long time.
Interesting. Very interesting. The information overload has obviously caused us to be able to see problems that already existed.
Right, and made into much larger problem than you can solve. And therefore be in shock of like the magnitude of a problem.
Crazy. Man, I've loved this. We've gone some places. This is great. Last question, PJ, for you. This is, I think, a cool one to wrap up on. PJ, multi-million dollar business. How many cars in the garage? Is it 20 now? 20 plus? Is there more than 20 now?
39 total.
Because remember the podcast. 39. 39 in the garage total. PJ, right now, would you say that with what you've achieved and what you've gotten materially, would you say that you are satisfied? And would you say, if yes or if no, will you ever be satisfied with more?
So cars aren't a value of success for me, and they're not a value of wealth either. It's almost like saying if you're a watch collector, you're not going to wear 100 watches you own. It doesn't even matter, you know? You probably wear the same 3 watches every day that you love the most, you know, and the other ones are just for
Mm,
collection's sake or have a historic value. So I'm a car fanatic, so my car collection is not a reflection of my wealth, it's a reflection of my cultural understanding for cars and appreciation for them. So I try to collect very unique and different cars from different eras for different reasons, you know, like that are personal to me. There I was too poor to afford a Porsche back
sure.
then. It was the Aston from James Bond. You know, this was the Bugatti I've always wanted when I was a kid. Whatever it is, I look for these things as a personal accomplishment thing slash personal passion project. My
Sure.
satisfaction in terms of fulfillment and existence, in terms of is there enough, I believe that my personal evolution has been incredibly satisfactory for how far I've come in 40 years of existence. As a result of being able to
Great.
impact well over 150,000 students across multiple platforms, having taught many people how to become millionaires, having taught many people how to become more conscious, how to become more aware, teaching through my books, through my courses, and the fact that my life chosen purpose has been teaching, and I've had the pleasure of being able to convert that passion of teaching into monetary success as well as fulfillment success, is something that I see a lot of my friends much richer than me not be able to do. And then I've also been able to take my passion for cars, my passion for watches and luxury lifestyle, and also turn it into a significant business, showing again that even though I enjoy these things, they don't have to hold me down or anchor me down and be a weight, and instead they're propelling me to continue growing as an individual. I think that is what I account to being fulfilled and successful. Uh, I think I'm able to share that with my daughter one day. Able to share the ability
Mm,
to work in the things you don't love doing, so you can eventually be in the position you want to be, not just with the money you want to have. I think these are
sure.
the important differences between true success and just monetary success, is that I wake up loving what I do every day, loving coming to the office, loving the people I interact with, loving the people I help. And many people are equally, if not more successful than me financially, but can't feel that same way every single day. So for that reason, is there more? Absolutely. I don't intend to stop from making more money, but the byproduct of making money is the byproduct of who I am. So in order to make no more money, I would have to stop teaching, which I don't intend to stop teaching. I would have to stop enjoying cars, which I enjoy. So why would I stop? I would have to stop
Mm,
wearing watches because I enjoy them. Why would I stop? Like the argument is like, even if I don't want to make money, being who I am will automatically make money. So it's just a question of, if I continue to do what I love, will I make more money? Sure. Will I get better at it? Sure. Will it bring even more money? Great. If it doesn't, I'll still keep doing it anyways. So the argument is, I have enough money to stop doing it, but I don't want to stop doing that, and it'll eventually bring more money anyways. So there'll definitely be more cars, to answer your question in a non-philosophical way.
I love that. I love that. It seems like the result of that answer is because you have really personally discovered and established the true metrics of success for you.
For me, and that's the key, right? Every person has their own
For
journey
you,
to
yes.
consciousness, and that journey isn't based on what you define as success or what stage of the journey you're in to define it as success. The point is, your personal satisfaction with who you are plays a significantly larger role in what you have.
Amazing. PJ, I think that's a perfect way to wrap up. Honestly, it's been an absolute honor having you on the podcast. Just having you delving into your wisdom, your experience, your life, for you sharing your gems with me. I really appreciate that. And it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you for your time. If people want to, get in touch or find out where to hear more, where can they go?
So the easiest way to find a lot of the things we talked about in my books as well as my courses is learnfrompj.com. Very simple website. And otherwise, if you want to just follow more of my journey, just go to Instagram. I'm at I Create Millionaires.
Amazing. All right. All those links will be in the description if you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple But thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Story Vault podcast. Until next time, PJ, thank you so much, sir.
See you later, buddy. Thanks again for having me.